The Watchers. High in the peaks of Mount Hermon, according to an ancient and controversial manuscript, 200 heavenly beings made a pact that would forever alter the course of human history. Most people today refer to these beings simply as fallen angels. But the ancient text that describes them in the most vivid and striking detail calls them by a very specific name. They are the Watchers. And what the Book of Enoch actually says about their descent, their motives, and their ultimate punishment is far more complex than the popular legends suggest. The story of the Watchers is found in the first section of the Book of Enoch, a collection of writings that deeply influenced early Jewish and Christian thought. When people search for information about this text today, they often find sensational claims about secret ancient aliens, forbidden prophecies, and hidden biblical conspiracies. But when we strip away the modern myths and look directly at the ancient manuscript, we find a profound theological narrative about the origins of evil and human corruption. According to the text, the Watchers were a specific class of angels assigned to observe humanity. They were holy ones, dwelling in the spiritual realm until they looked down and saw the daughters of men. The text explicitly states that they became enamored with human women and desired to have children with them. But the Book of Enoch reveals a detail that is often ignored. This was not a chaotic, spontaneous rebellion. It was a carefully calculated conspiracy. The leader of this group was an angel named Semyaza. The manuscript tells us that Semyaza gathered his followers and expressed a deep fear. He was afraid that the other angels would abandon the plan at the last moment, leaving him to face the devastating consequences of this massive sin entirely alone. To ensure their loyalty, all 200 Watchers gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon. There, they swore a solemn oath and bound themselves by mutual curses to execute their plan together. Once they descended, the Watchers did more than just take human wives. They began to teach humanity secrets from the heavenly realm that were never meant to be revealed. This is one of the most crucial elements of the Enochic narrative. The text is not just a story about illicit marriages. It is a story about illicit knowledge. Different Watchers taught different skills. Semyaza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Another angel taught astrology, while others taught the reading of the clouds and the signs of the earth. But the most destructive teachings came from an angel named Azazel. The text states that Azazel taught men how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He revealed the metals of the earth and the art of working them. He also taught women how to make bracelets, ornaments, and cosmetics to beautify the eyelids. Through Azazel, humanity learned the arts of war and the tools of seduction. The Book of Enoch states clearly that because of these teachings, godlessness increased, fornication multiplied, and humanity became entirely corrupt in its ways. The ancient author is offering a theological explanation for human suffering. Evil did not just spring from the human heart. It was introduced from the outside by rebellious spiritual beings. The union between the Watchers and human women produced offspring. The text describes them as towering giants, creatures of immense size and insatiable appetite. These giants quickly consumed all the acquisitions of men. When humanity could no longer feed them, the giants turned against the humans and began to devour them. The earth was filled with unprecedented bloodshed and violence. In response to this absolute devastation, the text describes a desperate cry rising from the earth. The souls of those who had been destroyed cried out to the gates of heaven, pleading for justice. This brings us to a pivotal moment in the manuscript. The four great archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, look down from heaven and see the blood being shed upon the earth. They approach the throne of the Almighty to present the case of a dying humanity. The Book of Enoch gives us a detailed account of heavenly beings violating their designated boundaries. But this rich and dramatic narrative was not created in a vacuum. To understand why this story was written and why it became so incredibly influential in the ancient world, we have to look at the older, far shorter biblical text that inspired it. Continuo para approxima parte dois? The foundation of the entire Watcher narrative rests on a very brief and mysterious passage in the book of Genesis. In the opening verses of Genesis chapter 6, the biblical text describes a time when the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. This short passage goes on to mention the Nephilim, who were on the earth in those days, describing them as the heroes of old men of renown. But here is the crucial detail. The Genesis account is incredibly short. It spans only 4 verses. It never uses the term watchers. It never mentions Mount Hermon. It never names Semyaza or Azazel. And it says absolutely nothing about angels teaching humanity how to forge weapons or cast spells. So where did all of these elaborate details in the Book of Enoch come from, and why were they added? To understand this, we have to look at the historical world in which the Book of Enoch was written. Most scholars date the oldest section of the book, known as the Book of the Watchers, to the 3rd century before Christ. During this period, the Jewish people were living under the shadow of massive empires. First the Persians, and then the Greeks following the conquests of Alexander the Great. This was a world filled with constant warfare, advanced foreign military technology, and rapid cultural shifts. The ancient author of Enoch was looking at a society overwhelmed by bloodshed and asking a fundamental question. How did the world become so corrupt? In later Christian theology, the origin of human sin is almost entirely focused on the Garden of Eden and the disobedience of Adam and Eve. But for the ancient community that produced the Book of Enoch, the primary turning point in human history was the descent of the Watchers. They believed that human beings were certainly capable of sin, but the massive systemic evil that plagued the earth was introduced by hostile spiritual forces. This explains why the forbidden knowledge brought by Azazel is such a central part of the text. Notice what exactly Azazel teaches. He teaches the forging of swords, knives, and shields, representing imperial military power. He teaches the making of cosmetics and jewelry, which in the ancient prophetic tradition was often associated with idolatry and the seduction of foreign cults. The Watchers did not just corrupt humanity through their offspring. They armed humanity with the tools of its own destruction. This interpretation of the Genesis narrative was not just an obscure fringe belief. It became incredibly popular and influential across the ancient Jewish world. We know this because multiple copies of the Book of Enoch were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the mid-20th century. The community living at Qumran clearly valued this text and preserved it carefully alongside traditional biblical manuscripts. But the influence of the Watchers did not stop with the Jewish communities of the Second Temple period. When the early Christian movement began to spread in the 1st century, the followers of Jesus were deeply familiar with the Enochic story. Many of the earliest Christian writers accepted the story of the fallen angels as literal history. They believed that the pagan gods of the Greek and Roman empires were actually the demonic spirits of the dead giants, still deceiving humanity. The New Testament itself contains clear echoes of this ancient tradition. In the letters of Peter and Jude, there are direct references to angels who abandoned their proper dwelling and are now kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment. The Book of Jude even quotes a prophecy directly from the Book of Enoch, treating it as a recognized and authoritative voice. Before the text faded from mainstream use, it left us with a chilling description of the exact punishment handed down to the rebellious angels. When the archangels presented their case before the throne of God, the Almighty did not respond with immediate annihilation. Instead, he commanded a specific and prolonged judgment. The archangel Raphael was ordered to bind Azazel hand and foot and to cast him into the darkness. The text says Raphael made an opening in the desert, threw Azazel into the jagged rocks, and covered his face so that he would never see light again. Semyaza and the rest of the watchers were forced to watch the destruction of their giant children. The text describes how the giants were provoked to fight and destroy one another in a massive war of mutual slaughter, while their angelic fathers looked on in horror. Only after witnessing this devastation were the watchers bound beneath the hills of the earth. The manuscript states they will remain imprisoned there for 70 generations, waiting for the final day of judgment. This terrifying vision of divine justice offered profound comfort to the ancient readers. It assured them that no matter how powerful the forces of evil appeared to be, their destruction was already decreed. But this brings us to a major historical contradiction. If this text was so beloved, so widely read, and so deeply influential on the writers of the New Testament, why is the Book of Enoch not in most Bibles today? Continuo para approxima parte tres? To understand why the Book of Enoch is missing from most modern Bibles, we have to look closely at how the biblical canon was actually formed during the first few centuries of the Christian Church. The process was not a sudden, secret decision made overnight by a single council, but rather a long and highly debated evolution. While the Book of Enoch was deeply respected and widely quoted by early church fathers like Tertullian and Irenaeus, later Christian leaders began to view the ancient manuscript with increasing suspicion. One major issue was the bizarre and highly physical nature of the Watcher story itself. As Christian theology developed and became more strictly philosophical, the idea that angels, who were understood to be purely spiritual beings, could physically reproduce with human women became a severe theological problem. Influential thinkers like Julius Africanus and, later, Saint Augustine strongly rejected the Enochic narrative. They argued that the sons of God mentioned in Genesis chapter 6 were not angels at all. Instead, they proposed that these were simply the righteous human descendants of Seth, who had committed the sin of intermarrying with the wicked descendants of Cain. This new interpretation gained massive popularity because it completely removed the messy supernatural element of angelic rebellion. It replaced a cosmic invasion with a simple, understandable story of human moral failure. At the same time, the rabbinic Jewish community, recovering from the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70, was also moving away from highly speculative apocalyptic texts. Without the support of the major rabbinic authorities or the later Christian bishops, the Book of Enoch gradually slipped out of mainstream use in the Western world. By the Middle Ages, the complete text was considered totally lost to Western Europe. For centuries, scholars only knew about the Watchers through short quotes preserved in other ancient books. It was not until the year 1773 that an incredible discovery was made. The Scottish explorer James Bruce traveled to East Africa and brought 3 complete copies of the Book of Enoch back from Ethiopia. For many decades, Western scholars were highly skeptical. Some argued that the Ethiopian church had simply invented the text much later in history. But that skepticism was utterly shattered in the mid-20th century with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among the ancient fragments found in the caves of Qumran, archaeologists identified multiple copies of the Book of Enoch written in original Aramaic. These fragments perfectly matched the Ethiopian manuscripts, proving beyond any doubt that the Book of Enoch was an authentic, ancient Jewish text dating back centuries before the time of Jesus. Unlike the Western traditions, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had never rejected the text. They had preserved the Book of Enoch continuously, holding it as fully canonical scripture written in the ancient Ge'ez language. Their absolute dedication ensured that the vivid story of Semyaza, Azazel, and the fallen watchers was not erased from history. So, what does the Book of Enoch actually say about these mysterious beings, and what should we conclude from our investigation? When we read the ancient text carefully, it becomes clear that this is not a science fiction story about ancient aliens teaching primitive humans how to build monuments. It is also not a literal, historical newspaper account of events. Instead, it is a profound, desperate, and highly symbolic theological reflection on the existence of evil in the world. The ancient Jewish authors were living in a violent world dominated by ruthless empires. They looked at the devastating weapons of war, the systemic oppression, and the seductive idolatry of foreign nations, and they concluded that such massive corruption could not have come purely from human invention. The story of the Watchers was their powerful way of explaining that humanity had been victimized and corrupted by hostile spiritual forces. But more importantly, the text provided a desperately needed guarantee of divine justice. The Watchers appeared powerful, terrifying, and completely invincible. Yet the manuscript promised that God was fully aware of the devastation. The binding of Azazel in the darkness and the imprisonment of Semyaza were meant to comfort an oppressed people, assuring them that God had already decreed the absolute destruction of evil, even if that destruction was not yet visible on earth. Modern internet theories often obsess over finding the physical bones of the giant Nephilim or mapping the exact geographical location of the Watchers' underground prison. But these literal interpretations miss the fundamental theological heart of the ancient manuscript. The Book of Enoch uses the dramatic rebellion of the angels to assure its readers that the Almighty sees the suffering of the innocent, hears their cries for justice, and will ultimately restore order to a corrupted creation. This ancient manuscript offers a fascinating window into how the earliest Jewish and Christian communities understood the intense, unseen spiritual war raging around them. But the Book of Enoch is not the only text that shaped the historical Christian view of the invisible realm. If you would like our next investigation to explore the mysterious biblical hierarchy of heavenly beings, from the terrifying six-winged seraphim to the specific role of guardian angels, leave the word angels in the comments below.